Hi, my name is Erica, the creator of TsundEri, the YouTube channel and blog about anything and everything having to do with anime. And welcome to my podcast, Nerds at Work with TsundEri, where I talk to proud nerds who turn their nerdy hobbies and passions into thriving careers. I'm very excited for today's guest, Kaitlyn Ugoretz. Kaitlyn is an anthropologist of religion and the associate editor for the publications at the Nanzan Institute for Religion and Culture, including the Japanese Journal of Religious Studies. She specializes in contemporary Japanese religion, globalization, technology, and media. Her digital ethnographic research focuses on the globalization of Shinto and the development of transnational online Shinto communities. Kaitlyn also hosts the educational YouTube channel Eat Pray Anime, where she explores the history and culture behind Japanese popular media. Her writing has also been featured in publications like the Washington Post, Religion News Service, and The Conversation. In addition to being a writer, editor, and social media manager, Kaitlyn is also a subject matter consultant for projects including games, television, and cultural experiences. And that's not even everything. Your bio is incredibly extensive, and I'm very excited to dive in. So, Kaitlyn, how are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing good. It's good morning from Japan. The sun has risen in the land of the rising sun, and I would show you the outside with my camera, but it's just like apartments and more apartments.
We are in such different time zones because it is currently 8:45 p.m. here in
Yep.
Philadelphia. and it's also different days, right? It's Thursday where you're at.
Yeah, it's Thursday here. Hello from the future.
Yeah, I wanted to make a future joke so badly. So I'm very excited because, for one, you're my first guest to be currently based in Japan, and that was a really cool experience trying to figure out what time it would work for us. Because I was so worried that I was going to get the wrong day. Like I was going to think, oh, am I Thursday and she like Wednesday, or is it like a whole other thing? So we worked it
Yeah.
out.
Especially with daylight savings time in the US, it just moves everything around. I'm always on like timezone.com.
Yeah, pretty much. So the first question I always ask every guest is, what does being a nerd mean to you?
That's a really great question. Yeah, what does a nerd mean? Being a nerd mean to me? I grew up a nerd from the womb in a nerdy family. So for me, being a nerd is always part of like being a community. We'll probably talk about later. How I'm an anthropologist and I work with people,
Mm-hmm.
groups of people. But for me, like going to Comic Con or creating for YouTube. It's all about community, like not just being super passionate about like the nitty gritty details of some anime or some video game, but then getting to like share that with other people is really what makes being a nerd in this decade at least fun. Being a kid, maybe not so much.
It really is, though. I think that's something that you're the first person to really mention community like that too, on the podcast. And I have to say, over the last few years, I've always been a nerd. I've always loved being a nerd. But I have to say, over the last few years, just meeting so many other nerds, whether they're nerdy about anime or something else, that community just makes it so much more fun. Like the jokes that we crack, the places that we meet up, the events, it just makes it so much fun.
Definitely. I think we're so lucky to be growing up in the internet age where, like, before being a nerd, I think was a much more like isolating individual activity. Not that like it wasn't fun because you were by yourself, but tabletop role playing is a lot more fun with a group than like you just like sitting with your dice by yourself. Like
Yeah.
now I can go on the internet and see everybody posting memes about like the new Baldur's Gate 3 game and just like sharing all of the lore and the nerdy culture, and I think that's the most fun for me. Yeah.
It really is. And, I'm really excited to dive into your work because I think it is just so cool and so insightful. So I want to know, how did you develop an interest in anthropology? And then how did that morph into an interest in Shinto and like meshing the two together?
Yeah, it was not a straight line to anthropology or Japan. When I started at college, I was actually studying like ye olden Chinese writing, and I took a class on Shinto with like one of the few professors that really specializes in that at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
Shout out to Philly. Um, and I just fell in love with the class. My dad is a Presbyterian minister of a small church, so I grew up in like the background of religious communities. Um, being like a minister's daughter is kind of like being the like part of the president's family in like a really really small fish pond, like everybody's watching you. So I never really wanted to do anything related to religion until I started learning about Shinto, and I was like, wait, this is actually really interesting. And the reason why I took the class is because when I was a kid, I saw like Miyazaki movies, Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke, and I wanted to learn more about like what was actually going on in those movies that I grew up enjoying. And for the anthropology part, um, I'm I'm getting over being a shy sort of person, and I don't know why. As an introvert, I picked like working with people. Like my job is literally to like talk to strangers and just go up to them like at a shrine or something and be like, "Hey, what do you think about Shinto?" Um, but people are just so interesting. And as a digital anthropologist, as somebody who works on people on using the internet, they're always doing neat or wacky things on the internet, and every day there's like new content for me to look at. Whereas if I was a historian, all the stuff that was made in the past is already made, like it's a finite amount of material. But I get to see people like thinking and doing things in real time, responding to problems, and that for me is really interesting. So I have to kind of overcome my introvertedness. People are messy and complicated, and I like just like making friends and learning from people why they do the things that they do and why they enjoy the things that they enjoy.
Yeah, and I took anthropology courses when I was in college. I wasn't like a major in it. I majored in journalism, but I would take anthropology and sociology classes, and it really put into perspective the world around me and how complicated everything is, and how nothing is really, for one, nothing is as it seems, and also people just are way more complicated. Than people, culture, history, it's way more complicated than what we would ever imagine. I feel like it's also, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when after studying anthropology, I've always considered myself a very empathetic person, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that level of empathy went up after
Mm-hmm.
anthropology, because you realize how much goes into being a person. If that makes sense. So was that something that you experienced too? Like just this level of understanding and empathy, like, oh, this, I kind of, I get it now. Or I'm, maybe for me personally, I was just like, I'm a bit less judgmental now.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things about anthropology is that you don't just learn about people in one culture, but that you learn about people from all over the world, and seeing like what's the same across cultures and what's different, what the values are, and like how people grow up with that is really interesting. And I think it teaches you to think about people and how you relate to other people in a much more broader way. I mean, ideally, I think anthropology is supposed to build bridges between people, help us understand each other, and I don't know, like contribute to world peace or something. But every time I think you see like a negative stereotype about a group of people, um, anthropologists have that like knowledge of like the details and the differences between even the people in the same group, to be able to say like, no, like, everybody's different, and you might have people that fit in this like one box or category, but then, you find people over here who are doing the exact opposite, think differently, within the same like system. So I think, yeah, anthropology is great for building empathy and just knowing how like people respond to stuff, and being able to understand why people do the things that they do is really important. I also like only took a couple of anthropology courses when I was in college. I was more into like linguistics and politics. But I think more than linguistics or politics, what we really need now is just like understanding people and learning how to make friends from different cultures.
Yeah, and just having, yeah, and having that breadth of knowledge really helps you become a more well-rounded person. What I want to know is like, tell me about your research and how that goes and what that looks like.
Sure, yeah. Like, what do I do as an anthropologist on a regular basis, right? Yeah, it really depends. So I usually describe myself as a digital anthropologist. And what that means is that I'm looking at what people do and how people come together through digital media. So through social media platforms, like I look a lot at Facebook and Discord, like chats in the YouTube comments, Reddits, things like that. And I pair that with like the more traditional anthropology, which is in person. Most of the time, like if you're thinking about like a traditional anthropologist. They are wearing like, I don't know, weird safari gear from like the Tarzan cartoon. And they're like, in the wild, talking to the locals, taking notes and like photos and things like that. We call that participant observation in anthropology. And that's really the core, like whether you're on the internet or in person in a virtual world, is really like sitting and being with people for a long amount of time, so you really get to know them as whole of a person as possible without being able to like read their minds and spy on them or anything like that. So I do a lot of participant observation on the internet, and I also do it in person. So when I'm doing it in person, I definitely go to Shinto shrines. For anybody who's not familiar in your audience with Shinto, it's often called the indigenous natural ancient religion of Japan.
Mhm.
And as somebody who's really interested in technology and globalization, I come at that question from like a completely different angle. I'm like, okay, so you're saying that Shinto is this ancient thing that Japanese people do in Japan. What if I look at white Americans doing Shinto on the internet, like in their bedroom in Kentucky or something like that, right? To like look at questions and definitions and people's lives in a different way. So the main like religious site for Shinto is typically Shinto shrines. So instead of churches, they have shrines, and there are shrines all over Japan. There are like upwards of 100,000 shrines. There are more shrines in Japan than there are konbini convenience stores. Which, if you've been to Japan, you're like, how can there be more shrines than family marts? But it's true. And there are also a handful, maybe like around 20 total shrines outside of Japan. So a lot of my field work has been at shrines inside of the United States and Hawaii. So there were three shrines in the United States. And because I was based at the University of California, Santa Barbara, I worked the most with an Inari shrine in Los Angeles. So, but now that I live and work in Japan, which is kind of a new thing, I've only been here for a year. It's really exciting to be able to go to all of the shrines in my neighborhood and around Japan and ask them, what do you think? Shinto is like. Do you think foreigners can do Shinto? What's the best way for them to participate? Um, and I've also been looking at like how everybody's responded to COVID. Like, how do we go to shrines and do things in this new normal of social distancing and things like that. So I'm on the ground, but I'm also at my computer like a lot of the time.
So, what has been the common responses that you have gotten when talking to people at Shinto shrines about essentially like the globalization of Shinto and like, people who are not Japanese or not from Japan participating? Like, what is the common responses that you get?
Yeah, I find that people outside of Japan have more hangups about it than in Japan, actually.
Mm.
Um, So, people in Japan that I've talked to, Shinto priests and just folks that live in the area around a shrine or tourists from other areas, they usually say that they don't have a problem with it, but it's really hard for them to imagine. For example, I went to Yasaka Shrine, which is in Kyoto. They're really famous for this big festival they do every year, the Gion Festival. And I asked the priests there, like, hey, I know a bunch of people in the United States who would really love to get like amulets and charms from your shrine. They want to pay respect to your deities. How could they do that? And they were like, how many people? Like one or two people? Like you could bring them the thing? And I was like, no, what if there's like hundreds or thousands of people? And they were like, does not compute, because there is this really long history of thinking about Shinto as a Japanese thing, even though like during World War II times, under Japanese imperialism, people in Korea and Taiwan and all over the Pacific like were forced to do Shinto. So it's not like that only Japanese people have ever done Shinto. And when Japanese people move around the world, like there's been so much migration to Brazil and Hawaii. The people who live there bring their religion with them, right? So there are tons of shrines in Hawaii. So anyway, people in Japan, they don't really think about other people maybe being interested in Shinto beyond tourism. So for them, it's like, wow, like people go home and they still think about Shinto. And so I'm, part of my work is breaking down this idea that, like, oh, only Japanese people do Shinto. But just because maybe the majority of people, I mean, definitely the majority of people who do Shinto are Japanese, doesn't mean that that's like an exclusive boundary. Like, because Japanese people do it, nobody else can do it, kind of thing. But then when you go out of Japan and you're thinking about globalization, you also have to think about power dynamics and, like, is white people doing Shinto cultural appropriation? If their local priest told them it's okay, if Shinto priests go to anime conventions and like teach people about Shinto and help them do, rituals, is that cultural appropriation? Like, where are the boundaries of like being authentic and listening to the people who like started that religion, and what are the dynamics between sort of like imperialist countries and then also like Asian Americans and Asian people in diaspora, and their voices, like how do they feel about it? So everybody who's involved in this network of like global Shinto has different opinions on the right way to go about it. So it can be really stressful and tense, but it's also just like really interesting, and everybody's figuring out it as they go along.
I'm glad that you brought up the power dynamics, because that is something that I've noticed when talking about cultural appropriation. There was years ago, Gwen Stefani
Oh my
went through,
gosh.
yeah, went through her era.
Yes.
What was it? What was it called? The
Harajuku
Harajuku.
girl.
Yes, her
Yeah.
Harajuku era. And well, the thing is, I remember reading a lot of articles about that, post her era, years later. And I came across that same kind of conundrum where it was a lot of Japanese Americans that were like, yeah, that was really problematic and cultural appropriation, really like fetishy, and it made us uncomfortable. And then there were people that were from Japan that were like, oh, it was vibe. It was vibe. It was cool. We thought it was interesting, whatever. But what it came down to, that at least what I saw in those articles, is that it's like you said, it's those power dynamics. If you are someone who is um, in a country that does not have the same history um, of colonization or racism or segregation, or etc., or internment camps and things like that, like what we had over here. It's different, right? There's going to be that different perspective. So I thought it was interesting that you brought that up, because it made me remember that it does come down to just like different histories there. And I've seen that with other cultures too, where someone might where, like, you might have an artist who is appropriating I don't know, like Latin American culture, right?
Hmm.
And us in the States, we're like, we don't like that. That's weird. Like, why are you talking like that? Why are you dressing like that? What are you doing? But then
Hmm.
someone from the country of origin might be like, hey, we actually thought it was really cool, but it's because there's a different history there. So I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, from the perspective of Japan, they market themselves as this place that is like so cool. It's like the future, but it's also ancient past. And like shrines want tourists to come, but then they just kind of want them to come visit and like, contribute to the economy and then leave. So like
Mm-hmm.
what do you do with the people who stick around? But Shinto
Who
is
overstay their
really,
welcome.
yeah, exactly. And like Shinto has been on both sides of imperial countries. Like, I just mentioned that during Japan's imperial era,
Mm-hmm.
they, went around and made people do Shinto as part of their patriotic duty as colonized subjects. But at the same time, in the United States, Japanese Americans, exactly as you said, were being interned. And actually, the first people of the Japanese community in America that were interned were Buddhist and Shinto priests. The FBI had actually
Oh.
had a list of them. And as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, they were like, "That's it, lock it down," and didn't allow anybody basically to do Shinto. So there were actually so many more, I think, I can't say like numbers because the records are actually gone. There was a history
Oh,
of
wow.
Shinto in the United States that was basically completely obliterated because of World War II forced incarceration. So, yeah, talking about the politics of, you know, who gets to say it's okay for you to do thing, heritage practitioners versus like convert practitioners is really sticky. We've seen this in Buddhism in the United States since like the 50s, the 60s, the 70s with like the Zen boom. Shinto's kind of like the new Zen. So it's like the same dynamics all over again, but we're figuring it out like fresh. And then the thing about global Shinto is that because, like, I'm an American scholar, most of the time based in the United States, and a lot of the people on the internet who are like really loud and take over the spaces are the Americans. There are people like all over the world who are in these online communities. So the dynamics for the people living in the United States are completely different for the people living in the UK, living in
Hmm.
Taiwan, living in Brazil. So there's no like one size fits all sort of take on like, okay, if you fall into this category, you can do Shinto, but only this way. And if you're in this category, you have to do it a different way, which makes things really, really tricky.
It goes back to what you said about people. We're just very complicated and messy. Like we're in such a hyper globalized era, or time. Yeah, where you're going to see so many different influences from different countries and different places. I had an example in my head, and then it escaped me. That's somebody's dog.
We love a pet cameo.
Right. I live in an apartment.
I know how it
So
is.
that dog hates me, by the way.
Oh
Um,
no.
yeah, every time I walk out, I'm keeping this in because hopefully my neighbors, who if they happen to hear it's at work, they know that I know that your dog hates me.
On the record.
It's on my podcast. Your dog hates me.
It's definitely a struggle. Most apartments in Japan don't allow pets, so that's like not my issue, but my main concern is like that I'm very loud when I'm recording and that my neighbors are like,
Oh.
Designer, like you're so loud, like shut up, I'm a white American girl. Like
Oh my gosh. So, you know what? That actually brings me to another question is, so how you've been in Japan for a year, and obviously
hmm
it's for your research. How has your experience in Japan been over the last year? And what are maybe some like surprising, um, maybe cultural differences that you've noticed either as an anthropologist or just being new to the country? Like, what's that been like?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm very lucky to have a position as an instructor and as an editor here in Japan. Um, I went a little bit viral on Twitter during the pandemic for not being able to get into the country. I'm working on my dissertation still, and I was actually here in Japan in February and March 2020. Almost like didn't get out, and then after that I was supposed to come back in the summer for to do my research, and then all of the borders closed and we were under neo sakoku, like the country was locked down, you know, nobody could come in. um and so that was a really difficult time. Like nobody thought that that would last 3 years. So the fact that I was able to finally like get here and do my thing last year, I'm super grateful for.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, living in Japan long term has been an adjustment. I mean, even if you're like within anthropology and you already know like how Japanese culture works, living in it is a very different type of thing. More or less, like, you know, people aren't the problem for me. It's a lot of like the bureaucracy is very surprisingly difficult. Going from like an American institution to a Japanese institution, we have to do so much paperwork, and like this it really is like a paperwork society. Like everything has to get signed and stamped on paper. We can't email it. Maybe you fax it. I like have never seen a fax machine before in my life, so that's pretty
Until
wild.
Japan.
The biggest thing when I was looking for an apartment here, and I'm very lucky to have multiple types of privilege that makes apartment hunting easier for me than a lot of other foreigners. It was still not easy, but much, much easier. Is like how to recycle your trash and stuff. Like that's a very like small stupid detail, but knowing how to sort everything into like these 7 different categories. um,
7?
yeah.
We just have
Has
trash
been
and
really
recycling.
important. When I was apartment hunting, I asked my agent, because you have to go through an agent here basically to find an apartment. Like, is me being a foreigner a problem? And he's like, No, but like, let me call ahead. And they're like, hey, we have this foreigner. Yeah, she's a professor. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Okay, he just wants to know, do you know how to sort your trash? And I was like, yeah, sure I do, in theory. And he was like, yeah, she can sort her trash. Okay, it's fine. So just getting used to like these little things that like people who grow up here don't have to think about has been difficult. But having like lived in the Philadelphia area and then going out to Santa Barbara where like I didn't have a car and I had to ride the bus for an hour, transportation is amazing here.
That's what I've
um,
heard. And honestly, I see it like I know that anime isn't necessarily like an accurate representation of Japan all the time, but one thing I've noticed in a
mhm.
lot of shows is just how reliable public transportation is, how everyone uses it. And I'm like, that looks beautiful. That
Yes.
seems amazing.
I live for a subway. So, when I'm going about my daily life, everything in Japan is very convenient. But then when you hit a roadblock, sometimes the bureaucracy is just like insane. There was a meme a really long time ago. This guy who went, "Why Japan? Why?" So most days I'm just like vibing, doing my thing, and then every once in a while you hit a "Why Japan? Why?" moment. Um, but being able to live in the country where there are tons and tons of shrines and things to do as an anthropologist is really fun. So I'm enjoying my life here. This is the first time I've ever been able to afford my own apartment. So
Really?
I'm living my best life right now. Yep, I can afford to live and eat. Thank God.
Isn't doesn't that make a difference? Like
It do.
sometimes,
Like, grad school's rough. Yep.
yeah, sometimes I'll just sit on my couch and I'll look around my apartment and I'm like, I can do this. I did this. I can be here. I have rent money.
Yeah, that's the important thing. I can pay my rent and I can eat. Thumbs up.
Honestly. So, back to the shrines. This is what I wanted to touch on earlier, and I
Oh,
got
sure.
a little sidetracked. You had also mentioned COVID, how that had impacted people visiting shrines. What are some things that you have noticed in terms of whether it's like locals going to shrines or tourists? Like, what has changed since COVID?
Yeah, so during COVID, like you could still go to a shrine, but a lot of things that you would be accustomed to if you went to a shrine on like a regular basis were suddenly missing, and people were like, "Oh my God, like what do I do?" For example, when COVID hit, I was here and I was like paying attention to what are the shrines doing. When you enter a shrine, the proper thing to do is to first like wash your hands and mouth.
Hmm.
And you can like see this in some anime, maybe Kimi no Nawa. And so you wash your left hand, your right hand. Like you're not really supposed to drink the water, but you touch your mouth and then you rinse that hand with like a ladle. I don't have one here. So you dip it into the water and you like wash your hands. The ladles were suddenly missing because those are a high contact surface.
Oh.
So then people were like, how do I go into the shrine if I can't wash my hands? Like it's so rude to like the deities and Shinto are called kami. And so if you were talking about, the kami near you, you would, proper like honorably call them kami-sama, right? So
Hmm.
like, how do I go say hi to kami-sama and tell them, the struggles that I'm having if I can't like wash my hands first? It's like not being able to take your shoes off when you go into somebody's house. So that was like really a struggle. And after COVID, it's not over, but okay. Um, it is according to the Japanese government. Let's say that there are a lot of shrines that still haven't brought their ladles back. So that was a change. After you wash your hands, when you go up to like the actual shrine building to pray, a lot of times you ring a bell rope to like get their attention. Like it's like ringing the doorbell. Hey, I'm here. Hi. And they put them away. And then it's like, So okay, I can't take my shoes off when I like go into your house. I can't ring the doorbell. Like, what am like? It just feels kimoy. Like, it feels bad. Like, you, like, oh,
It feels
so
rude, but it's also like there's a
yeah,
pandemic, so
exactly. But like the Shinto deities, the kami, a lot of them like are in charge of helping with epidemics. Like the shrine I mentioned earlier, Yasuka Shrine, the Gion festival that they do every summer, specifically to get rid of epidemics. And their festival, most of it was canceled in 2020 and 2021. So it was very much like we have these tools in Shinto to respond to like the anxieties that we're having and try to pray for an end to the pandemic. And we can't like do 90% of them because of the pandemic. So that was really stressful. And priests had to find a lot of different ways to get around these obstacles that they hadn't encountered before. And as a digital scholar, it was really interesting to see how they used technology or didn't to
hmm
get around like, okay, if we can't all be in the same building, can we live stream? But Shinto is really different from some other religions in that like there's been a taboo against using the internet for like internet mediated worship since the mid 2000s. So this was a moment where shrines had to be like, okay, now can we maybe use streaming? You know, like can we put stuff on social media? How do we get around this? Whereas the shrines outside of Japan like don't have those similar hangups. So the
because it's
priest that
different
I work with,
cultures.
exactly, the priest that I work with the most in Los Angeles, she had been live streaming to Instagram and YouTube before the pandemic even happened. She's got a Patreon website for her shrine supporters. Like, you know, the way that she does things is completely different from the way a lot of shrines do stuff in Japan. So it's been really interesting to see, like, now that shrines are trying to come back from a lot of the restrictions that they had before, what they keep that they changed during COVID and like what they go back to. And that's still like unfolding right now.
I was going to ask because, I feel like especially with COVID, there are even, COVID is still out there. A
Hmm.
lot of government entities are declaring that the pandemic is over, but for you, that's what they're saying. But we're still in a
My
we're
friend
still
had
in a
COVID last week.
yeah. I had a work event in Boston, and there was a bunch of people that couldn't make it because they got COVID. You know, um, singers and musicians and touring bands are getting sick and having to shut down. Like we can, that's a whole other thing. But as we, whether COVID is out there or not, as the greater population returns to as close to normalcy as we can prior to COVID, um, do you see, like you see that there's going to be a lot of changes that will still stick around? Because I think about how with COVID, there's going to be some things that just aren't going to be the same. I like
Hmm.
personally for me, this is necessarily may not be like a thing at large, but for me personally, I don't see myself going on planes or public transportation without a mask on. Even
Mm.
20, 30, 40 years from now, I'm like, no. or the way we look at things like washing your hands. I mean, we've always sort of been washing our hands, obviously, but like, they're just things like social distancing and washing your hands and being safe and, masking up, even if you're going to a doctor's appointment. Just seeing those things, like, are you seeing some of those, like, I guess, new normals, with people
Hmm.
visiting Shinto shrines?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I said, a lot of the ladles still aren't back. Some of them are. This is very fresh in my mind, just the hand washing thing, because I just wrote like 50 pages about it for my dissertation. um, like a lot of places, they constructed new hand washing stations that actually allow you to be socially distanced and not have to use the ladles.
Mhm.
So like in those cases, the actual infrastructure of the shrines has changed. And that was like not inexpensive for them. But some things that are like still the same here is that, a lot of people in Japan are used to wearing masks. A lot of
Yes.
people are wearing them right now because the pollen is starting to come out and they have allergies. So they just like, don't want to deal with the dust and the pollen. So a lot of people are masking. Prior to that, it was kind of like cold and flu season in Japan. So a lot of people were masking, especially on public transportation. So the masking culture is quite different here. That was actually a problem in Shinto when COVID broke out here, because it's rude to wear a mask in front of the kami. So the priests were like, I should wear a mask with the people who are coming to pray. But I shouldn't wear it in front of the altar while we're praying. But we're indoors. And
It
like
really turned everything
eventually
upside
it
down.
did. Like all of the things that they take for granted in Japan were suddenly different in similar in different ways, like than they were in the United States. Um, but Shinto, aside from festival times, a lot of times you're already socially distanced. Like you can just go to a
Hmm.
shrine by yourself, you pray outside, and then you go home. There doesn't have to be a lot of interaction with people or close proximity. But during
Hmm.
festivals like New Year's, um, it's a big problem. So yeah, New Year's, people still have reservations now that they've been taught to think in a way that involves risk, um, and thinking about elderly people and children and people who are immunocompromised. I think there's a lingering anxiety that will continue to change the way people do things, even like slightly.
Yeah, it's interesting to, as being in the States, you really hear more so about how COVID is changing your habits and the way you go about things in your own
Mm-hmm.
backyard in your own community. So it's interesting to hear about how other countries are dealing with it and how what their new normal is looking like.
Mm-hmm.
So I like it's interesting just the layers of it. Like I didn't think about how COVID could have an impact on Shinto and the different like what's the word for it, like customs associated with
Mm-hmm.
it. So this, I do want to switch gears a little bit because there was
Sure.
something that I thought was so interesting. So you also have done like consulting for different media and games and things like that. And I guess what I want to know is, well, for one, like what does that look like for you? Like if there's any projects that you've worked on that you want to talk about, like what does consulting look like for you in terms of Shinto and representation?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. It really it depends on the project that I'm consulting for. It's a little difficult to talk about because a lot of times there's an NDA involved.
Oh, well, yeah. If
So
there's anything that you
uh,
can't talk about, don't worry about
yeah,
it.
I'll be careful. But for example, one of the most recent projects that I've worked on is a trading card game that involves several mythologies. And when the company contacted me, it's not out yet. I think it's stuck in development hell, and I'm like, but I want to show it off. Like this is really cool, and I actually want to play the game. Like I have no idea how the game actually works. Because what they had me do was come in and they said, we want this deck to be about Shinto and Japanese mythology in general. So they had me come in and give them basically a lecture on like Japanese mythology 101. And then I looked at the different types of cards that they had in the deck. They had done their own research, but they really weren't sure like if it was right. And the main thing that they wanted is to make sure that all of the depictions of like deities and things were respectful, that they didn't have anything that was like completely incorrect, that the
Hmm.
images were on point, like that the kimonos weren't over the wrong way. So you're implying that the deity is dead, which is like definitely a faux pas. um, and stuff like that. And then, so from my perspective, I was also really invested in making sure that there was more balance in the
Hmm.
deck. So for me, it's all about like making sure there's a diversity of representation, and that everything is, of course, like appropriate and respectful. So I wanted to see more women in the deck. There was a lot of
Hmm.
dudes. There were like 4 women cards. I'm like, out of 60 cards, you can have some more women in here. Let's think about how we can get that in there. Historically, Shinto and Buddhism weren't that different. But most of the cards were kind of Shinto based. So, like, can we put some more Buddhism in here? Can we put more folk religion in here? And then, like, is it accurate to the time period? Like, would all of these different characters that they've basically, pulled from different media sources, would they actually like live together in the same world?
Mm-hmm.
And how would they interact? What would their powers be like? Stuff like that. So it's really about like making sure that the world building is accurate and respectful and diverse and rich. Like, I want everybody to be able to feel like they really are like learning something from the game, even
Mm-hmm.
if like the it's just a trading card game. It doesn't come with an hour lecture from me and the other people that they hired to tell them about Shinto. But just like looking at the cards and what's present,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully like they kind of internalize a little bit, like, oh, there's all these different things. Like, there were a lot of really cool women doing cool stuff, women warriors, women deities, different stuff like that. And hopefully people who are like into anime and video games will
Mm-hmm.
see things that are familiar to them and feel like, oh yeah, I know about that thing a little bit, or oh, I remember that from that anime. So that's the most fun for me, is just like making sure that everything is I don't know, correct. Like, there isn't really a correct way to do things, but I want people to have a more diverse um perspective on like what is Japan. It's not always the same like tropes that you see in media.
Yeah, and you brought up anime. Obviously we're at a point right now where anime is just it's been seeing a huge boom in mainstream popularity. Something that like even as a kid I just did not foresee. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I go and I'm like, there's like anime shirts at Walmart. That's wild.
Yeah.
Like it's just here. That's crazy. Have you noticed with this huge boom in anime, has it translated to a bigger interest in Shinto worldwide? Are you seeing?
Yes, exactly. So Shinto basically means like the way or the path of the
Mm-hmm.
kami. And I always tell people like there's more than one way to get interested in Shinto. So for a lot of people, it is anime and manga and video games. For other people, it's like martial arts,
Mm-hmm.
or they're really into philosophy. But anime has definitely increased the number of people who are familiar with maybe some Shinto gods or some of the material culture. Shrines is a place that people can go. Definitely shrine maidens. Like, if there's the number one thing I think people have gotten out of anime about Shinto, is that there are shrine maidens, although they're incredibly fetishized in a really gross way, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Even
there are
I have seen
definitely,
that.
yeah, there are a lot of people who get interested in Shinto from anime, myself included.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's always a question of whether those fans will kind of like take that interest to the next level and learn more about it, or just kind of enjoy the aesthetics of it or something like that. And as I mentioned earlier, there are now Shinto priests outside of Japan who are going to anime conventions and like giving lectures about what Shinto is, and like showing what a Shinto ritual looks like, which is something that you can only see in like a few anime. Like Kimi no Nawa, Your Name is one of the most recent ones that has like a lot of Shinto elements in it. And it's also made talking about Shinto a lot easier, I think, as a professor. One of the lectures that I give most often is Shinto and popular culture, and teaching both educators and also my students, like, oh, you've seen this thing? Let me tell you what this thing actually is. Like, oh, you see this white paper streamer zigzag thing? Like, let's break down like how that's related to ideas about purity. And in my perspective, the more that you can know about the background of the anime that you enjoy, the more enjoyable it is.
Yes.
So I'm pretty thankful, I guess, that anime has gotten people more interested in learning about Shinto.
I became a little bit more familiar with it when it's so funny. It was like the very, very, very first YouTube video I did for my channel. It was
Uh huh.
I think, oh my gosh, it was like anime influences in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and
Oh, yeah.
and there's a lot of Miyazaki influences in
Mm-hmm.
Avatar, and there's a lot of Shinto influence in Miyazaki films. So
Mm-hmm.
by the transitive property, you come across you come across aspects of Shinto in Avatar, and I had no idea about that until I started researching for that video,
Mm.
and it actually made me appreciate the series more and how much effort and how much heart went into that initial project and how much research went into it, which makes me want to ask you, like, how has your relationship with anime or media in general like changed the more that you've really dived into, Shinto and your research and passing this knowledge on to others?
Sure. Well, it's definitely changed the way that I watch anime. Before I got into this research, I was just watching anime for fun. So I would watch anything that was either, available in the olden 90s or, whatever kind of genre I thought was cool, had like maybe some cool magic system or fighting or, like a good shoujo setup or something. These days, because I'm looking for content for my YouTube channel, Eat Pray Anime, I'm much more selective with, okay, this looks like it has something interesting going on with religion. Like I want to watch that. Or there's a topic in Japanese religion that I really want to teach people about. Where can I find an anime that has an element like that? So now I'll
Mhm.
be watching pretty much anything on TV and I'll be like, oh, that would make a great video. Like I need to save that for later. I'm like on the lookout. Somebody told me, Kaitlyn, there's Shinto and Genshin Impact, the video game. When COVID started, they released Genshin. I know in one video you mentioned like you're not a huge gamer.
Oh, I know what Genshin
But do you
Impact
know
is, though.
Genshin Impact? Okay, good,
Yeah, yeah,
good, good,
yeah,
good.
yeah.
I was talking to
I love
somebody the
seeing
other
like the
day, and they
characters
were
like
like, "Genshin what?" And I was like, "It's huge,
it's
man."
for someone who doesn't play video games, I'm very video game adjacent. Like,
You're in
I
the
know,
space.
I think it's yeah, I think it's because I have a lot of friends that play games, so I
Mm-hmm.
know about a lot of them. I know the plots and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I I get stressed when I play games. I
Oh
don't know
no,
why,
I'm
but
sorry.
when people play and they lose, they're like, yeah, okay, whatever, I lost. Me, I'm like,
uh-huh.
I'm shaking. I don't have the nerves for
Yes, there
this.
are some games I can't play because my anxiety does not vibe with it. Like, there's this really great ninja game, Sekiro, which is really
Mhm.
fun, and I want to make a video about like the candy in it and how it's related to Buddhism, which is like so random. But like, you die so often, and it's so difficult, and like I can't like finish the game because I'm too stressed out, and I don't need
Years
that in
ago,
my free time.
years ago, I had
Um,
oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh no, no, I was just gonna say, years ago, one of my friends, she wanted me to play. I think it was one of the Persona games with her, and I watched her play, and I was like, "This is beautiful. The soundtrack is beautiful. The characters are beautiful. I want in. I want in." I couldn't.
Oh no.
I was getting. I don't know what was happening because she was in the middle of the game when she let me take the controller. She had respawned, so she just let me play this round. I don't know what was happening to me. I just know I was getting beaten up, and I was like, "Hey, I've had enough." I was like, "I've had enough. I'm sorry, I can't
Oh
handle this.
no.
It hurts."
Yeah.
You were
Yeah.
saying about Genshin Impact.
Yeah, yeah. So my friend told me like, "Hey, Caitlin, you should check out Genshin Impact." When the Japanese country Inazuma came out in the
Mhm.
game, is when COVID had started, and the storyline at the beginning when they released the country is that they've been closed to the outside world and you have to try to get in but you can't get a visa and it was like great, this is my life. And then when you get in, you could actually like go to shrines and things.
Just like
So
reliving the
it
experience.
was it was fresh. Yep, I was living it multiple times at the same time. And like they added more content, and I'm always hoping like Genshin will add more content. When they add like something about the French country now, I'm like, I don't care, more Japan please. um but there was this whole like quest about like water and purification and shrines and things, and it turned out that I my advisor had written a book about Shinto and the sea, and he doesn't do anything internet, nothing social media, definitely nothing video game anime. Like he thinks that's
Mhm.
wacky as anything. And so I said, like, will you make a YouTube video with me? So one of my videos, I have my advisor who talks about like the history component, and then I make it make sense with the game. And one of the things that I look for now when I'm watching anime or playing a video game is not just like, what kind of video can I make out of this? What can I teach people about it? But how do I make the really cool work that my colleagues do on Japanese religion that, like, you know, nobody outside of academia reads, because like it's really hard to just like find and pick up a book about Japanese religion. Everything we do is so niche. Like, how do I find a way to show off how cool I think their work is through you know, what I know about anime and video games? So I'm always thinking like, oh, like Professor so and so works on that. I can link it to Persona 5, something like that, and make scholarship more accessible. So now I use anime more as a tool, which I'm honestly a little bit sad about, because people always ask me like, oh, are you watching this, like this new show right now? And I'm like, no, I'm several seasons behind on everything because I have like 4 jobs, you know.
Listen, me too. Okay. One of my friends, I shared my Crunchyroll account with her, and she was texting me. She goes, "You have not been watching anime." And I'm like, I've been busy. And she's like, well, you need to watch, you need to catch up to this show because you're the only person I could talk to about it. You have not, like, she really got my kid. She's like, you have not been watching anime. We were on FaceTime. She just randomly broke into that. And I was like, okay, I've been busy. I didn't know I was going to be attacked today.
Right. Like, yep.
But
what's craziest is when sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
What's craziest is when I teach like young kids. Like sometimes the teachers ask me to come into like middle schools or high schools and teach them a little bit about Shinto for their like world religions class or civics or whatever they call it. And like I get read by the youngsters. Like I started introducing myself and I said, yeah, you know, when I was your age, I was really into like Pokemon. And this like little kid in the front row is like, hold up, do you watch any modern anime? And I was like, oh my God, I'm old now. I'm so old.
No, you know what these youngsters don't understand is that when you've been an anime fan, I feel like most anime fans, and I include myself in this, who have been watching anime forever. I've been watching anime since I could retain long-term memory. At some point, I still like watching a lot of the new stuff that comes out, and like I have friends that I talk about the new stuff with. Like I'm behind, but I am watching Sign of Affection. But it's like, for the most part, we like watching the old stuff. Like we like revisiting the old stuff. Like I have, I'll watch a new series once or twice if I really like it. But what's really on repeat on Crunchyroll when I am logged in, it's Yu Yu Hakusho. And I've seen that anime is from like it's a classic. It's from the early 90s. It came out before I was even thought of. And it got to the States and I was like 7. And I've just been watching that. I've seen every episode front to back. I could quote it a million times with like the last 20 something years that I have been watching it. And that's just what I go back to. Like when we like the new stuff, we'll watch it. But when you've been in the game for so long, you want to look at the classics.
There's an archive now. Yep.
Yeah, you want to watch the classics. And then there's so much too because anime's become so much more accessible. There's so much anime from decades ago that we didn't really have access to before that we have access to now, or anime back then that wasn't dubbed back then. So now it's getting dubbed now. Like it took 10 years for the Nana anime to get dubbed in English.
Yeah.
Like, let us enjoy our throwbacks. They'll be here
don't
soon.
Know how hard it was.
They don't know, but they'll one day when they are our age. I sound like old man yelling at cloud.
Yep.
When you're our
like
age,
VR, anime, AI, something.
And they'll be
they
talking
didn't
about
watch an anime in 24 parts on YouTube.
Right? But one day, years from now, they're going to be all like, yeah, when I was your age, Sign of Affection and Free Ren and these were like all my faves. And they'll be like, right? Do you watch any modern anime? And their heart will drop too.
Yep, the kids will be like, what's Demon Slayer, Grandpa?
Demon Slayer? That's old. We're watching like, I don't know. I couldn't think of a pun. Demon Non-Slayer. Demon Reviver. I couldn't think of a pun. But yeah, so like these youngsters, they're gonna learn one day. Oh my goodness. That's like the perils of being like an older anime fan. They don't get it.
Yeah, I face this. This is my future as a professor. Like right now, I'm the cool young new one, but one day I won't be cool and new and young. And then what? What do I
Are
have
there
then? I'm not sure.
when you I'm feeling this way because I just turned 29, which isn't old, but every now and then I used
Did
to
you say
be
29?
29, which is it's
Yeah, me
not old.
too.
Oh, you're 29? Okay. Like
Hmm.
I figured we were about the same age.
Yeah.
But I just turned 29, and side note, it's like I used to be the youngest in spaces, but now when I'm going
Mm.
out to like concerts or I'm talking like anime spaces or whatever, it's like
Hmm.
the youngest here and this person has never actually heard of this anime before and I want to go home.
Aging nerds.
Right. Um, but I want to know, so like, when you're talking to your students about anime and Shinto, what are some connections that you have made with anime and Shinto that maybe is really surprising to your students? Like, has there ever been a moment where you taught something to your students and they were like, wait, what? That's based in Shinto? That's what that means?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. There's so little like publicly accessible scholarly work on Shinto, that a lot of times, students come into my classroom not knowing anything, or it depends on like where they went to school. Like when I was usually in the United States, you learn about world religions in seventh grade. And some of my students come in saying, like, yeah, we had a unit on Shinto or something. And then some of them have never heard of it, and
Mm.
then I'm trying to like make connections. I'm like, have you seen this thing in anime? And they're like, no, I haven't watched that. I'm like, okay, have you seen this thing? Like, I'm always trying to make connections. And I mean, one of the great things about teaching is that every class is different. Every class has new students and they make connections. And then the most exciting thing is to see like the light bulb go off in their head and then help them figure out, okay, how does that like fit into this older historical stuff? If the students are invested in learning about something that they think is cool, the whole class experience is going to be more successful. So I don't know if anything in particular has really surprised me, but my students have been surprised, for example, that there is so much kind of undercover Shinto stuff in what they watch. So then after they learn a little bit more about Shinto, they're like, oh, I can start kind of picking up those things too. One
Mm-hmm.
of the first two videos I did for my YouTube channel are really cringy now because I made them in my parents' kitchen in the middle of the pandemic. And I had to like stop the take every time my dog knocked over my tripod and my ring light. Um, like a lot of the powers in Naruto are based off of the names of Shinto gods. So I actually
Oh.
like explain, okay, how are the powers kind of inspired by the gods? What are they kind of missing from the equation? And then that lets me talk about this like old text from 712 CE that like explains where all of these gods came from. So it's always pretty surprising what kinds of connections you can make, but it really depends on like the student's frame of reference, and that's always changing. But that keeps it fresh and interesting. So they're always
Awesome.
teaching me things about, I don't know, Zelda. Right now, I'm working with a high schooler who's looking at Shinto and Zelda, and I didn't have the right console growing up to play a lot of the early Zelda games, so
Mm.
she's teaching me things.
I hear a lot of. I have a friend of mine who's a professor, and he's told me about how like, yeah, I teach my students, but sometimes I'm like, they're kind of taking over here.
Hmm.
They taught
And
me
that's the
something.
best.
Yeah.
That's so much better if they're engaged than like asleep. I gave my lecture on Japanese video games, and I thought, okay, this is my peak lecture teaching Intro to Japanese Popular Culture. And this kid was asleep in the middle of the front row, and I was like, "Why are you here? This is as good as it gets." Talk about Final Fantasy.
It's like this is the best thing. Like, wake up. You're missing magic.
I would have
Um,
loved to have learned about Japanese video games when I was in college, but uh, dude must have been tired.
that's what I miss about college is just all the different crazy classes you could take that were also just very helpful in their own way. I'll never forget I took oh my gosh, it was history of the Beatles. And I'm not a Beatles fan.
Oh.
I'm not
Hmm.
much of a Beatles fan, but I'm glad I took that class because it wasn't just history of the Beatles. I also learned like just all the different factors that was going on in the world that set it up
Mm.
for the Beatles to take over, because it was just a very specific time where people needed a specific thing. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Like if you really want to understand Miyazaki, you got to know about World War II and like what it was like to be
Yes.
in Japan during that time, you know?
Yeah, because
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
his work touches on, his experiences with, um, yeah, like his experiences like growing up during that time or the aftermath and all that. And when you learn that, you have a completely different perspective. Like my
Mm-hmm.
perspective of Spirited
Yeah.
Away changed completely when I learned more
Mm-hmm.
about Miyazaki's story. And I was like, oh, this man he's spitting.
He's got something to say, that's for sure. That's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about making YouTube videos, engaging with people at cons or working on trading card games or whatever. Is that like the percentage of the population who actually like has the time and the resources to take a class on Japanese religion or anime or whatever is so small. But that doesn't mean that like everybody shouldn't get to learn about that stuff. So I'm really big into making stuff, publicly accessible. Use the internet so you don't have to spend like $100,000 a year to go to college to learn about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and was that a huge inspiration for you starting your channel, Eat Pray Anime, which I also want to talk about really quickly because I just think
Sure.
that's so cool.
Yeah. I never planned to start a YouTube channel. um, like many things in my life, they just kind of happened serendipitously, which I guess is I'm a big planner. I'm a perfectionist, so when things go different, I'm like ah. But then they turn out to be okay. I actually started my YouTube channel because I had a good experience working on somebody else's YouTube channel. I was asked as a consultant to write a 5-page series for a way bigger YouTube channel, Religion for Breakfast, which is hosted by Dr. Andrew Mark Henry. And he was thinking about expanding. He's like an ancient Christianity scholar, and he wanted to start doing other religions, and he wanted to team up with experts on those particular religions. So the first one that he wanted to do, because he's a big Miyazaki fan, is Shinto. And so we worked on that together. And I was so glad that I didn't have to be in front of the camera, because I am a shy introvert at heart. And I saw the response of people. Like people are actually really interested in Shinto. Within the first half an hour, thousands of people had seen that video. And today over 500,000 people have seen the videos that I wrote for Religion for
I was gonna say
Breakfast.
I watched those videos earlier, and it was
Oh,
like, yeah, I was like,
great.
those, yeah, I was
Yeah.
like, those. That's I meant to get to this earlier, but I was just so entranced, like what, like the other topics that we covered. But yeah, I saw it was like at least like 500,000, 530 something thousand on some of those videos.
Yeah, and like I never thought that many people would be interested. I will like, even if I do get a job in like a long-term job in academia, which is not guaranteed. The job market is not good. I will never teach that many people in the classroom, and I realized I can teach so many more people through YouTube and video than I can, at some fancy, expensive university. And so I started thinking, like, well, if I had my own channel, I would call it this. And once I came up with the name Eat Pray Anime, I was living with my parents during COVID at the time, and they were like, "That's really cute," and it just kind of spitballed, like snowballed from there, into okay, well, like people have questions in the chat on Andrew's videos.
Hmm.
He can't dedicate his whole channel to Japanese religion, and a lot of people don't know that like somebody else worked with him on those videos.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, I think I can kind of take what I've learned from working with Andrew and start doing my own thing. And so that's how I started Eat Pray Anime. I was also very depressed during the pandemic, not being able to get into Japan, not being able to do a lot of my research. So I thought, okay, like this is a fun new project. And it just got bigger. I mean, it's still a very small channel, but we're working on it.
I relate to that so much. That's why I started TsundEri. I was very sad, and it wasn't. I think I started right before I was working in news, and news was making me
Mm-hmm.
sad. Journalism itself was
Yup.
making me sad, and then when the pandemic hit, it made it even more sad. And I started the channel just to kind of have this space to just have some fun and explore topics that are interesting to me. And then I don't know if you experienced this when you came up with the name Eat Pray Anime, but it was like well, maybe you did. It's like you come up with the name and then it all just kind of comes into place. You're like, I got the name. I know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing. Like I
Yep.
know what direction. So it's like when I came up with TsundEri, I was like, TsundEri. I was like, oh, we're cooking with grease. We got
It's
this.
so cute. When I first saw your account name on Twitter, I was like,
Oh,
yep, mm-hmm, clicks. Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably the most clever thing I've ever come up with
It's a good
TsundEri.
one.
I
Take it
was
to
like,
the bank.
I was going through like so many different names, and then I was like, oh, well, people. I was gonna call myself TsundErica, but there's a voice actress. Her name is Erica as well, and she works on anime, so a lot of her platforms are called
Mm.
TsundErica. And I was like, darn you, proud of you, but darn you. So I was like, well, my friends call me Eri, so TsundEri, and I think it was meant to be.
It's really cute.
It's like once that name comes in though, it just snaps into place. And I loved Eat
Mm-hmm.
Pray Anime. I thought that was so clever and cool because I felt
Oh,
like that
thanks.
gave me a very clear idea of what that channel was about. So I think that was really awesome. Do you have like any videos from that channel that you feel like are your favorites to share? Like if someone were to watch your channel, what videos would you recommend first?
Yeah. Two that I'm really proud of are I had a two-part series on anime like pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of people in Japan and anime fans around the world who like to go to places that pop up in the anime that they like. And some of the things that they do at those places, which sometimes happen to be shrines and temples, look kind of like religion. So I wanted to take an article that I love by Dale K. Andrews that I think more people should read about this and how people would like paint their own prayer boards. If nobody's ever seen a prayer board, I've got two right here. My recording studio is parallel to here. These are two little prayer boards. People started
Oh,
painting their
cool.
own with anime characters and leaving them at shrines. And on the back of the prayer board, usually you write like your prayer, and
Mm-hmm.
fans started writing them like to the characters of the anime instead of the gods of the shrine. And I just thought that was so interesting and fun with anime that I turned that into a video. Another series that I'm really proud of is I call it Myth Meets Marvel. So outside of anime and manga, I'm super into comic books. When I was growing up, I was really lucky. Like Thursdays, me and my dad would go to the comic book store. Saturdays, we watched Pokemon and like Gundam Wing, and then Sundays, we went to church. So I kind of smashed all of that into my life now. And this really, really popular cover artist for comic books, Amikomi, American comic books, Peach Momoko is Japanese, and she started this series called Demon Days, where she took Marvel characters and turned them into like a manga style folklore, like yokai, monsters and magic type of
Oh, that is
thing.
so cool.
And I was like, these are all of my favorite things in one thing. So I started making videos like breaking down, like, okay, this character is this monster, and like, here's why that's really interesting and cool. And so I did the 5 issues of Demon Days. And after that, the artist actually contacted me on Twitter and was like, hey, I like your videos. Like, thanks. And she actually agreed to do a live interview with me. And she does very, very few live interviews. There are maybe like 3 on YouTube. And so it was all in Japanese, which was terrifying. And we got to talk about like, oh, like, how do you come up with your characters? What's different between like American comics and making manga and things like that. So that was really, really fun. And, it allowed me to also kind of get my comic book nerdiness into the channel too.
That's amazing. You never know who's going to see your content. And I think it's really cool
Yes.
that she saw that and was like, "I would love to like talk to you." And you got like this really rare moment. You never know who's going to watch your content. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. And I had another question. I completely lost it. But I guess my next question would be, my next question is, what advice do you have? Because I know you have to go soon. We're going to wrap up in a bit. But
Okay.
my next
Mm-hmm.
question is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to learn more about Shinto, or in general maybe has an interest in a particular like religion or culture and wants to pursue that study in the same way that you have pursued your study of Shinto, what advice do you have for them?
Sure. Oh boy, that's a big one. Like I mentioned earlier, there are not as many experts in Shinto who teach at universities. If your viewers or your listeners are living in the United States, and probably even fewer outside of the United States, so learning about Shinto outside of the classroom can be difficult. Definitely, one way is to watch my series for Religion for Breakfast, to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Eat Pray Anime. Um, and there are a lot of great books now, though, being published on Shinto. I'm trying to see over on my bookshelf what I've got here that I would recommend. Oh man, so many books. Do do do. Um, Actually, I don't have a print copy of the one that I like. I'll just grab these two. Doo-doo-doo. So there's way more available now in the last like 10 years than when I started. One is exploring Shinto.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is backwards on video. Sorry. Overseas Shinto Shrines is one of my current favorites, by Carly Shimizu, because she does actually talk about shrines outside of the United States. So there are books out there. I recommend doing reading some books. If you want to go into academia, honestly, I don't know if I would recommend it, because everything is a bit of a mess right now. If anybody is like really interested in doing graduate work, um, you have to have a really tough conversation with students
Mm-hmm.
who are interested in that, because there are so few jobs. There are not enough jobs for the people who already have PhDs to teach about the thing that they've. You can study this thing, like if you want to get a PhD, it's going to be 5 to like 10 years of your life. The pay is not going to be good, and not all of the skills are translatable. So you really have to be down for the journey, and
Mm-hmm.
the poverty, and the maybe not having a job at the end of all of that hard work, which is something I'm like staring down the barrel of myself right now. But at the same time, my advisor at the time, Julian Thomas, who wrote Drawing on Tradition, Religion, Manga, Anime, and Religion in Contemporary Japan, he sat me
Mm-hmm.
down and had the same conversation. Like, I know this is what you're really interested in, this topic. I like your work. There might be no future. If you can do anything else, go do that. But obviously, I decided, no, I'm really interested in this. This is what I want to do with my life. I want to study this. I want to teach people. And if you feel like that, then grad school might be for you. My recommendation, if people like do want to get more into academic study, is make sure that you think about what you're going to do with your knowledge and your skills after grad school. And you can see me trying to figure that out in real time. I'm writing for public venues. I'm making YouTube videos. I'm doing consulting work. I'm trying to figure out, how you can make a living knowing things about a niche religious tradition like Japanese Shinto. Um, but I think that, just like the name of your podcast, Nerds at Work, like you work it out and you hustle and you find a way to make that work. And like we said in the beginning of the podcast, it's ultimately a good thing to know more about the things that you like, and to know more about people and cultures and history.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get some of that in your life one way or another, I think that's a net positive. So if anybody's
Yeah.
interested in talking more about like what it's like to be an academic, to be in these spaces, to study something obsessively for a living, you're free to contact me. I'm on like all the socials.
That was my next question, is like, where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm very online, TM. Um,
Same.
so aren't we all these days? I'm on the platform I continue to call Twitter, at Kaitlyn Ugoretz, and on Blue Sky as well, at Kaitlyn Ugoretz. I'm on Instagram. under my regular name, and also Eat Pray Anime. I'm on my YouTube channel, Eat Pray Anime, and my research website where people can contact me is www.ugoretz, Ugoretz, research.org. And if none of that works, you can type into Google Kaitlyn anime Shinto ? Redhead. I'll pop up.
Just have all your options.
Yeah. A combination of those keywords should help you to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. You are incredibly busy. You have when I was on your website, I was like, oh my gosh, she does a little bit of everything. So I really appreciate you taking time out of your day for this. And this was a really wonderful conversation. And for those listening, if you want to find me on social media, I always forget how to introduce my handles every time. It's an awkward transition every time. You can find me on Twitter at It's the TsundEri. You can find me on Instagram at the TsundEri, so THE TsundEri. And you can find me on TikTok at _TsundEri, and then on my website, TsundEri.com, where I post my blog posts, I post my YouTube videos, and also find me on YouTube, TsundEri. I try to keep it consistent everywhere.
We love to see the branding.
Right. Listen, as soon as I saw that no one had TsundEri, I was like, I'm taking this everywhere. Mm-hmm. I'm taking over this. There can only be one. So again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see y'all next time.
Thanks for having me.